Thank you, Keith. You can see Keith tomorrow night at Eddie V's
That's right,
in
City
City
Center.
Center. I've been there. Order the lobster tacos and think of me. Um, so back in 2015, one of the members of this church, Dr. Roger Leslie, he wrote a book called My First Last Year. And the subject of this book was he lived a year of his life like it was the last year of his life, even though he's still here. And it was in diary form. And then he started teaching a bunch of classes where he taught us stuff about this class. And I took that class twice. I didn't pass it the first time. Um, and so today I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I learned by taking that class. And there's probably some of you in here that took that class as well. He probably did 4 or 5 of them, I think. Your mileage may vary. You may not remember things or may not have the same learnings that I did. So I'm just putting that out there. So I think our class had maybe like 30 people in it. And one of the first things he did was he led us in these meditations that really had us get to the core of what was ours to do. Like what are our big bucket list items? What did we want to work on for the year? The class was a year long, and we were to live it like it was our last year. And so I don't remember much about what I had on my bucket list, but when we all went to share with the rest of the class, at the end of my sharing, I said in kind of a low voice, hoping no one would hear, I think I want to preach a sermon one Sunday. And as soon as I said it, I'm like, where did that come from? Who is this? Because I had never wanted to do anything like that, and I don't even know where it came from. And so I promptly forgot it. I did not work on it that year, and it was several years before I ever got up to do a talk in church. So stay tuned. There's a whole big story of how I got from there to here, but that's for another Sunday, so I'm not going to talk about that today. But the first part of the class was just really about understanding what are these big things I want to do in my life. And Roger really wanted us to talk to a lot of other people in the class. It was a diverse class. I didn't know but about half the people in the class because they were part of Roger's network. But we started slowly to get to know each other and what different people's ideas of or what they were going to do. And he said, y'all network with each other. There was this younger than me couple in the class, and they had just started coming to our church maybe a month before the class kicked off. Now, I had met them before they came to church because they had a booth at the farmer's market where they sold soap. And they had a little store in the Woodlands where they sold soap. So one day, the lady called me, and we had been in the class for several weeks at that point, and she says, hey, I know that you retired about a year ago, 6 months to a year ago, and I'm thinking about retiring in the next few months, and I need a lot of your help with that. And my first thought was, well, I think like me retiring from a big global corporation is different than being an entrepreneur because, we had a whole HR group at my company that helped us in retirement. In fact, they made us go through with our spouses a 2-day class 2 years before we retired where we talked about one whole day on all the money stuff and insurance and health and blah, blah, blah. And then another whole day on how do you want to show up in retirement? What do you want to do in retirement? How are you going to survive being retired, right? Because it's kind of a left-brained company, lots of engineers, and so we like our schedules, right? But I didn't really express that to her except that I saw those kind of 2 separate components of retirement. And I explained that I had a lot more trouble with the piece of it where you figure out what you're going to do every day in retirement. And she then explained to me that she wasn't the sweet, loving soap lady like I thought she was. That in truth, She was a federal agent, a federal law enforcement agent. And she was a badass. And that she explained that she had worked undercover in Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, that I didn't ask her how many people she had shot, but I wanted to. But I was a little bit of afraid of her at that point. But she said, when I'm undercover, I cuss like a sailor. But all that anybody sees me at church is this sweet, loving person. And so for the next several months, her and I worked together for both of us, how she would resolve those two distinct personalities and retire, and how would I just continue to really understand what I was supposed to do in retirement and who I was supposed to be. So that's what we worked on together. And there was stories that whole time of people just hooking up with people in the class that had the perfect skills to help them through whatever big things they were working on. And it's interesting to note that at some point about 3 years later, Reverend Jerry, who was our minister for like 12 years before Reverend Sonia, he called me one Sunday and said, "Hey, do you want to do the sermon in 3 weeks?" And I said, he remembered. And I said, yes. And he said, I said I couldn't say no because he had just preached a sermon that day about giving up your fears. So I preached that day. I did okay. And I said, thank you, God, I never have to do that again. So, but here I am. So the next thing that Roger really helped us with is a practice that you get up every day and you say, if today is my last August 3rd, how do I want to show up? How do I want to be? And so I learned really quickly that I just wanted to act in love, and that's what I focused on. So if it's my last time to go to Starbucks, I'm going to do it with love. If it's the last time to go to HEB, I'm sending love to every single person in there. And that's how I try to live my life. Now, if any of you, my husband's over here, he's shaking his head. He's going, really? So if any of you have had a conversation with me in the last 5 minutes to 5 years, you know that sometimes I can be mean. And sometimes I'm not in that love space because I'm not perfect. We're all a work in progress, right? But that was a great practice that he taught us. And the third thing that Roger really spent a lot of time on in this class was, what do you want your legacy to be? And that really drove a lot of people's behaviors, what they did every day during that year, and what their big things were that they wanted to accomplish. I did not really relate to that, but a lot of people really, that drove them. So those were kind of 3 really important things that I got out of that class. And then since that class ended, and really throughout that year that we did that work, and the second class that I went to that was that same class but maybe a little bit different, I've learned a few other things, so I'm just going to talk about some of those. The first thing I had to learn is that it's important to me that I'm aligned with God's will for my life. But before I was able to do that, I had to let go of a lot of baggage about God's will. Because any time when I was growing up that there was a horrible disaster, like if a child died, someone would say, that must have been God's will. Or if there was some natural disaster that was just horrific, people around me would say, well, that must be God's will. They never said, Uncle Joe just won $200 million in the lottery. That was God's will. Wow. They never said, oh, your cousin just got perfect on the SAT. He's going to go to Harvard and, cure world hunger or whatever. They never said that. That was never God's will. It was only like the really bad things. And then there were the missionaries. These missionaries would come to our church, and they would do a slideshow with pictures I mean, just the worst places you could imagine. There's flies on people's faces. They're sleeping on dirt floors. The water's not clean. There's no air conditioning. There's no chocolate. Just horrible, horrible situations. And it was always God's will for them to go to these places and save people. And I'd go home and pray and say, God, I need air conditioning, I need chocolate, I need good shoes, I need all of these things. Please don't make that your will for me. Well, as an adult, I learned that what God's will is for us, it's that passion in us, it's that spark in us. There's no doubt what is ours to do if we just get still and listen. And I'm so glad that I know that, because I know without a doubt that God wants me to be up here talking to you guys occasionally. Definitely not every Sunday. And I also know for sure that God does not want me to go to ministerial school. I am not meant to be a minister. I'm not meant to do this full time. So I've made peace with God's will, and that's important to me. Now, another thing that I've already mentioned is just this whole concept of love. And I'm just going to tell a story about, and I've probably told this story before, but in 2004, I got transferred to London to work. And my company transferred a whole bunch of IT people from all over the world to London to work as expats. I could not have picked London out on a map. I had been there once. I'd been out of the country, I think, once on a business trip. This was really the first time my company sent like normal people on expat assignments. Always before it was like the big wheels. And we would occasionally see them come back from Europe and have not been successful at all because they brought their big Americans, this is how we do it over there, and y'all need to get in line. And that was rejected. And so I had seen that in my life. And so I would pray like, God, why am I going over there? What's up with this? Because it just wasn't anything I expected at all. But I said yes. There was a knowing in me that knew I was supposed to go over there and do this project. And it was compounded by this thing that I had applied for the 3 or 4 jobs that I knew I could do on that project. And I got a call from this guy one day, Wilfried Plasmans from Belgium. And he said, yeah, you didn't get any of those jobs. And I want you to do this big refining manufacturing job, the project manager for that piece of it. And I said, I know nothing about that part of the company. I was always sales, marketing, distribution. And I can do some other stuff like data, but I've only been to a refinery once, and that was as a new hire. They sent all of us new hires out to Deer Park. We got to wear the funny hat. We got to see a bunch of interesting things, and we got to go eat at Monument Inn afterwards, and that's my manufacturing experience right there, But he said, I'm going to set you up for success. This is your job. So I'm praying like, God, what am I supposed to do over there? Am I supposed to fail miserably and learn a big lesson and have it be that's what is out of this experience? Am I supposed to go and be wildly successful and have that be my learning? What am I supposed to do? And every day God would say, you're just supposed to love people. You're just supposed to love people. So that's what I did every day. For 6.5 years, I just loved people. And yeah, I got a promotion. I had a few disasters, but I never lost that I was supposed to love people. Another thing that I know for sure that I'm supposed to do is laugh. I love to laugh. My dad was one of the funniest people I have ever met. He made us laugh all the time, all day long, every day. I did not inherit his sense of humor. My cousin Mike did. He makes me laugh all the time in our family group chats. My husband makes me laugh, sometimes at him, sometimes with him. But I love to laugh. So now I'm going to tell a story that's not funny. Jan told me the other day it wasn't funny, but I'm going to tell it. So, when my family growing up got allergies, we didn't say, I have allergies, I'm going to take an allergy pill. We said, I've got sinus. And we took a pill called Actifed. Actifed was a really, yeah, Heather's shaking her head. She remembered it was a really strong pill. It would cure anything. They later discontinued it, something about hallucinations. Well, the impact that it had on me was that it would make me laugh at everything. It made me giggle for hours at a time. I was high as a kite. Well, one day I'm working in Houston. It's probably in the early 80s, and I get sinus, and so I take me an Actifed. And a few hours later, everything's starting to be really funny. And that was about the time I needed to drive home. Now, at that time, you could see every day on your commute home a bumper sticker that said, "Visualize world peace." And I don't know what was going on in the world in the early 80s that we needed world peace, but we needed it because there was lots of those little bumper stickers. Well, that afternoon, I saw one that did not say "Visualize world peace." It said, "Visualize world peas." And I started giggling, and I started laughing. And I could not stop the entire 40-minute commute home. All that night I was laughing. To this day, if I need a good laugh, I visualize whirled peas. There you go. Another thing that I know is mine to do is to try and live in peace. And again, I've said this before, I can be peaceful or I can be right. And a lot of times I want to choose to be right, but I have to make myself choose to be peaceful and happy. And the last thing I'm going to talk about learning is something that Reverend Sonia teaches us every Sunday, right? It's got to be a practice. Every day I have to get up and say, how do I want to be today? Not so much what do I want to do, but how do I want to be? How do I want to show up? And are there any big things I want to do? And what is my legacy? Do I even have one? So in closing, just know God's will for us is that spark in our lives. It's what turns us on. And we can tune into that and bring in divine love, divine wisdom to guide us. And I know for me what's true is I am aligned with that will, with that love. I can choose love. I can walk in peace. And I can visualize world peace. I can laugh at that. Thank you. Thank you.